So good evening. To be respectful of everybody's time, we will go ahead and start. There's surely people who are trying to find a place to park and may wander in, but I just want to say welcome to City Hall and thank you for coming out this evening. Our intention here tonight is multifold. One, we want to give you an update on what our after action from the flooding events of mid-May have resulted in terms of what we have learned about what occurred, where we've identified some needs moving forward. We want to talk a little bit about what that plan looks like to move forward and to give you some sense of, to the best that we can, timelines and some of those kinds of things. I would love to be able to wave a magic wand and be able to fix all of the problems right now, but it's going to require some study and it's going to require some dollars, and we're just going to have to be systematic and resolute as we move through this process over the long term to look citywide at those areas where we had impacts. And then the last thing, and what I would say probably is the most important thing, is we want to hear from you. This is a very informal format this evening. We'll be able to pass around the microphone. We want to hear any questions or concerns that you continue to have about either the plan that you're going to hear a little bit about tonight or anything that remains unresolved from your perspective based on the presentation that we're going to have. Our Public Works Department has put together a brief presentation, 15 to 20 minutes. We would respectfully ask that you sort of think about the questions that you might have about that presentation while it's occurring, and then we can start sort of with questions about that when we're done. We have a clipboard with some sign-up information on it, so if you did not sign the sign-up sheets when you came in, we certainly want to take your information and be able to follow up with you after the fact as necessary with any additional information that we need to get out to the community. I want to acknowledge that Alderman Roger Wilson is in the room this evening, and Alderman Kelly Russell was here a little bit before the meeting started but was heading down to Winchester Hall. The County Council is having a meeting tonight where they're discussing the county's bikeways and path plan, and so she's a big bikeways and path advocate in the city and wants to make sure that our voice is represented at that county meeting this evening. So again, thank you for being here. At this time, what I'd like to do is turn the podium over to Zach Kirshner, who's the Director of Public Works, and Tracy Coleman, who's our Director of Engineering, to take you through the after action information that we've pulled together for you. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor said, I'm Zach Kirshner. I'm your Director of Public Works, and Tracy and I are going to work our way through this presentation. I'm going to tackle the first portion of it. Basically wanted to give the audience just a good overview of what our infrastructure is, how we operate and maintain that infrastructure on a daily basis and during storm events to try to minimize impacts to the public. Quick overview, we maintain both sewer and stormwater, storm drain infrastructure within the city. You can see there are some numbers as far as what we maintain: 166 miles of sewer, 4,300 manholes, 225 miles of stormwater utilities, and about 2,100 manholes and 5,300 inlets, along with some stormwater facilities. As far as maintenance, we have TV trucks, and we're able to TV inspect all of our infrastructure. We've been working our way around the city over the past couple of years to TV inspect all of the sewer infrastructure, and we're at about 95% inspected at this point. We've begun that same process with our storm drain infrastructure, and we're at about 15% inspected. And those inspections, at times will result in showing us where we have blockages, where we have cracks in pipes, collapsed pipes, and that helps us to identify where we need to focus resources so that we can get those types of infrastructure issues addressed. One of the things that we do for our sanitary sewer system in order to maintain and extend the useful life of those systems is to line them. Much of the sewer obviously is old. Frederick is certainly an older city. Much of the sewer is old clay pipe. Clay pipe cracks and allows what we call infiltration of groundwater. That groundwater is basically stormwater that we are then having to treat at our wastewater plant. So there is a benefit to lining those old sewer lines to try to minimize the amount of rainwater that we're treating at our wastewater plant, because it is expensive to treat water at our wastewater plant. So we have a pretty aggressive lining program. We have lined about 310 sewer main lines dating back to the late 90s, a total of 71,000 feet of sewer thus far that we've lined. And every year in our sewer CIP, our capital program, which you'll see as part of the budget. We've been budgeting about $1 million a year to continue that program, and that's budgeted for the foreseeable future to try to continue to get those lines taken care of. We also have many old city manhole covers that are not watertight. It's pretty critical to have watertight manhole covers, especially in your floodplain areas, because what will happen is if a sewer backs up or during a major storm, water will infiltrate down through those manhole covers, and you're again treating more stormwater in your system. And all of that additional water in the sewer lines obviously could lead to potential sewer backups. So that's another program that we have to try to minimize that infiltration of stormwater. Here's just some photos of what we see around some of our sewer lines. You see in the upper left there's water rushing in around a pipe. That's groundwater. It's at pressure because the groundwater table is high in that area. So what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll grout behind those manholes and around those pipes to prevent that water from entering our systems. We do have a very robust GIS utility mapping section, and as we identify issues in the field that need to be corrected as far as location of structures, we do work with our IT department to correct that. The more we know, the better we know what infrastructure we have out there, the better we can ensure that it maintains in good, adequate operating condition. We have weather stations around the city. Those inform us as events, such as, unfortunately, the ones that occurred in May, roll in. We're made aware immediately of what we're seeing as far as rainfall, stream gauge elevations, et cetera, so that we can try to mobilize our resources and pinpoint them where they're needed the most during those major events. On the stormwater side, we have a robust inspection program. We are required by MDE to inspect private stormwater facilities every 3 years, and we do require that the property owners of those facilities maintain them in proper operating condition. We also do have some city-owned and maintained facilities, and we of course inspect those to ensure they remain operating appropriately. On the storm drain and culvert side, we do have a compiled list of about 50 known drainage trouble areas. So those are inspected more often. They're inspected before, during, and after any major storm event to ensure that they're in good operating condition, and if they have sustained any damage, that we address it immediately. We have 2 major culvert runs, including the Rock Creek stream and the Maryvale swale, which cuts across Patrick Street near Frederick Middle and dumps down into Carroll Creek. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy to talk a little bit more specifically about the flooding events that occurred in May.
Thanks, Zach. Again, my name is Tracy Coleman. I'm the city engineer with the city of Frederick. First, I wanted to share some information about the storm. If you hadn't already heard about some of these values, but on the night of the 15th specifically, we received anywhere from 6 to 7 inches of rain, depending on what report you look at. What does that equate to? It's a lot of water. It overwhelmed our system because it came in such a short period of time. You note on the third bullet, Carroll Creek rose 8 feet in 3 hours. That's a lot of water fast. When Carroll Creek rises, it affects our storm drain upstream of those areas, because basically what it does is it creates a wall of water where we have some of our storm drain outfall. You also note that our wastewater treatment plant was treating a tremendous amount of mostly stormwater, quite frankly, because that water, as Zach had mentioned, was getting into some of our sewer system and getting to our wastewater treatment plant. I think the mayor has said this a few times since the event, but our Carroll Creek flood control project worked. It safely conveyed the water through the conduit system and basically saved the downtown. Baker Park flooded as it's supposed to. It is a storage area to allow water to fill up Baker Park before it flows through the conduit system. You've likely seen some of the photos of the area of that event, as well as the event on the 16th. But as I mentioned, Baker Park was flooded. The upper left-hand picture shows how much water was actually flowing into that system. We don't see that very often. A couple other places that we saw some very significant flooding. The left-hand picture is North Market Street at Schifferstadt Boulevard. There are a couple of culverts that run underneath those roadways. Again, just inundated with the amount of water that we received in such a short period of time. On the right is an example of what happens when the storm drain system is surcharged. I mentioned we had an 8-foot wall of water basically that ran down along Carroll Creek. It stops the ability of the storm drain to discharge into the creek, and when rain's coming in as fast as the creek rises, it has no place to go but to bust up our storm drain system. The picture on the left is Color Lake at 2nd Street. I've not been a lifelong resident of the city of Frederick, but from what I understand, Color Lake has not flooded so much that 2nd Street has been flooded, at least not on a regular basis. So what did we do on the night of the storms? Our staff was out doing their best to maintain and keep the infrastructure clear, to allow it to function at least to the best of its ability. Again, with that amount of rain, keeping it clear is all we can do to try to allow as much water to flow through the infrastructure as quickly as possible. We have, Zach mentioned, we have several areas where we do pre-storm inspections. We make sure that the inlets are clear, that the sewer is functioning the way it's supposed to be functioning. During the storm, we go to those same locations and then any locations where we're notified that there are issues. And then after the storm, we go back and check. And we did those things on both of the nights of the events. We responded to several homes where there were sewer backups and flooded basement backups. All right, so what are we doing for the future? Zach mentioned a couple of things. We're looking at a couple of different drainage basins, though we're not necessarily going to be limited to those in the future, but we have to take a look and study the drainage areas to understand if there are ways that we can provide safe conveyance for those larger than typically designed storms. Like I mentioned, 7 inches of rain in just a couple of hours or 3 hours at most is not something, and I know a lot of you have heard this, is not something that we typically design for. We don't typically provide safe conveyance for that. What we're going to be looking at is ways to provide safe conveyance and relief when our underground system can't help to convey the stormwater system. One of the areas that was affected a lot by the storms both on the 15th and the 16th, the Motter Avenue area, North Market Street, that entire area was inundated. So we're going to be taking a look at that and to determine if there are possibly some overland flow or places where we can allow stormwater to be captured and held up. We're not really sure, but we have to study that and take a look at. We already have a study for the South Street storm drain area that we have a study. There are some improvements that have already been made, and we'll continue to look at that to see if there are additional improvements we can make. Some things that homeowners can do to help to protect themselves where possible. We have some guidance from FEMA that's on the table against the wall. Some of the things that they suggest that we try to take a look at as well is to try to make sure the drainage is flowing away from your house. I know in older neighborhoods, you may or may not have the room to do that, but directing downspouts away from your house is a good way to prevent some of the drainage from getting back into your basements. When it comes to sewer backups, one of the things that FEMA suggested are backflow valves. Our plumbing department, our inspections and building and permits and inspections department, is we're working with them to help homeowners that have already come to us and tried to install those on their homes, and that's something that we would highly encourage. There's also information about the Small Business Association loans to help with cleanup, and then some of the improvements that can help to mitigate damage in the future. There's information against the wall for that. Again, so like I said, there's all that information. Any data, I think most of the people in the room have already talked to or reported damage. If you have neighbors that have not, that helps us to understand where we have issues. The city of Frederick is an old city. We love it because it's an old city, but it's hard to fix old parts of the city unless we understand what possibly we can fix. So with that, I think we'll open it up to questions for myself or Zach, the mayor. Comments?
So before we take questions, just a couple other things I wanted to acknowledge. Alderman McShane has come into the room, and Alderman Shackelford as well. And we have county emergency management folks in the room as well. So Jack Markey, who heads that, and Dennis Dudley. So that if there are questions that we can't answer in terms of some of the overall emergency management, there's been a lot of cooperation and collaboration among governments on this, and there really is a lot of expertise that's been afforded to us from the county in terms of the connections with MEMA and FEMA, the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We've met with those folks and had conversations already in terms of some of the follow-up that we need to do on the public side. The point that Tracy made about letting us know if you've experienced something and you haven't told us yet, please do. It's not too late in terms of the Small Business Administration loans that are available. The message that was given to us is whether you think you would ever use those loans or not, apply for them, because it gives an option to you if you decide you want to take advantage of it. And there's an August 13th deadline to apply for those. The way those loans work is they can handle both some of the replacement damage of things that you might have to do in terms of fixing things that were damaged by the storm, but those loans can also be used for some of those mitigation efforts. So things like potentially putting in a backflow valve or some other kinds of fixes might potentially be things that you could use those loans in order to do. So the encouragement is to apply and talk to the SBA folks, and you can decide at some point down the line whether or not you actually want to follow through on it. But if you miss the deadline to apply, then you've missed the deadline to apply, and again, that's August 13th. So at this point, I know there's a lot of information, there's a lot of numbers, but I think at this point what we really want to make available, we have a microphone that we can pass around, is we just want to try and answer whatever questions you have about what happened, what we're doing, or what we plan to do moving forward, and give you the best information that we can. We'll try and use whatever resources we have in the room, and I have to be honest with you, if I don't know the answer, I'm not afraid to say I don't know the answer, but we'll try and find it out. It's, again, part of the reason why we're collecting your contact information so we can reach back out to you at some point. So go ahead.
And a lot of time. But one of the questions that my neighborhood is wondering about, I live on Motter Place near the YMCA. The storm drains that exist are very few and far between. There is only one on our block. There are none at all on 9th Street in between Market and Motter. So that water has nowhere to go except into our yards and our basements. There is only one drain in the alley in between 9th Street and 10th Street. And that whole alley was a river because the drain is 3 feet wide, and for an entire block, that's just not enough. So my question would be, in the short term, for a fraction of the cost of big improvements, can you just put more drains in these streets, or is that impossible? I mean, it seems to me like it wouldn't be that expensive, and the water has nowhere to go.
So I'm going to let the engineer answer the question, because some of this gets to whether or not there's actually capacity in the lines in the ground. So if there was capacity in the lines in the ground, yes, more inlets would allow more water to get into those pipes and to flow away. But if there's not capacity in the pipes in the ground, more inlets, it's like pouring water into a glass that's full. It's still going to overflow. But I'll let the engineer, who can probably explain it in engineering terms.
Quite honestly, I don't know if I could explain it any better than that. That is one of the things that we are considering, is are there locations where we can install additional inlets? But one inlet may be inexpensive, several inlets gets more expensive, and then, as the mayor said, even if you get water into the pipes, if it can't go anywhere, it's still going to stay above ground. Part of one of the hopes of the study that we're going to do is determine if there are locations that all we need are inlets to help convey water faster away from, the downstream areas. That's our hope, to find out the information.
Is there a copy of this material that you have for us to take home tonight? What was on the screen?
I don't think we have printed out copies of it, but we certainly can post it on our website that makes it available for you all.
Is there a mapped out or pictorial information that the city has that shows us what is under our streets on Mater Place and Mater Avenue, like the diameter of them, what exists, how old it is?
We have a lot of that information in our GIS. Yes, we have a map of our city storm drain system. We typically don't put it out on the public GIS site. It tends to clutter it a little bit, but we can certainly, I think, provide a hard copy map of that, come in and let you look at it, explain it somehow. Maybe we have another town hall, I don't know, and explain the storm drain system as it is.
Okay.
Okay.
And the cleaning out of those drains in our neighborhood, like how recently has that been done?
So storm drain is designed actually to self-clean. When you have, and I don't want to hear that. The pipes themselves, they do. When we get even a less intense rainfall, the pipe is designed to carry any kind of debris downstream. In the storms of 2015, our storm drain staff TV'd that entire storm drainage basin. They found little or no debris in the pipes themselves, and only a little bit of debris in the inlets. Now, during a storm, is there going to be more debris there? Likely, because it's all getting washed to that low area. So that's where they go out before storms and clean off low spot areas, definitely. And then during the storm, if an area there's some localized flooding, either that we know about or we don't know about, then they clean that, and then after the storm, they make sure it's clean again.
There is a drain in our alley
Yes.
between 9th and 10th
Yes.
that it looks like original. It's sunk into the alley, and it clogs up almost
Regularly.
almost
Right.
regularly. So I don't know who's, you haven't taken a very good look at that, because it looks like it's about 100 years old, and it's clogging up all the time, and it was just a river.
So that drain, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's on top of a 78-inch tunnel that conveys stormwater. So our staff has walked through that tunnel, and I understand what you're saying, but again, during the storms are those times that those low spots like that tend to fill up really easily because of yard waste, leaves, trash, any of that. That is one of the areas actually we're looking at for a short-term fix, but I don't have any dates or times to determine that.
And if I could just add a little something on that in terms of sort of that maintenance, and this gets to, I want to say this is clearly, we recognize, and I think this entire effort is about the city trying to figure out what the right thing is to do in order to minimize the likelihood of impacts from these kinds of events in the future. There are things that our homeowners can do to help us in the interim. So if you're mowing your lawn, please don't blow the grass clippings out into the street, because what that does is create an opportunity for debris to then wash into storm drains and potentially wash over grates during an event and create an opportunity where flooding can occur. If you have storm drains and inlets in and around your property and you notice that there's something about them that looks like it's not going to work the way it needs to in a rainstorm, it's blocked or clogged or there's something, I don't know that we necessarily expect the public to go out and dig in the streets and pull that stuff out. But if you see something in the storm drain that doesn't look right, contact us so that we can come out and take a look at it. We showed you the number of manholes. I don't know what the number of storm inlets is. I don't remember if that number was on the slide. There's thousands of them in the city. We can't possibly check every one of them for every event. The public has to be some of our eyes and ears on the ground in advance of any kind of snow. We ask you during snow events to like keep fire hydrants clear and keep those storm inlets free of snow as well, because it helps with that drainage. It's true in the summertime as well. We don't need you to keep them free of snow, but leaves in the fall or grass in the summertime, whatever, anything that would keep the system from working the way it's supposed to. As the father of daughters, I can remember, what it meant when there was hair on the drain in the shower, and why you need to get that cleared out of the way on a regular basis so the bathtub starts to fill up, and nobody wants that.
So I was wondering if you can tell us anything about what's been happening since 2013. Most of us were, I'm sorry, 2015. Most of us in, the North Mater area went through this exact same thing 2 years ago, and it sounds like things are starting now as opposed to things having started back then. And this may just be a communication issue, and I do realize we're talking about different administrations, so I'm not trying to throw the gauntlet down, but I would be interested in knowing, are we just starting right now, or are we kind of in a process?
Yeah, I can answer that. I would say we're not just starting right now. We have, at this point, we have inspected all of the storm drain system in that area, so we have that information available. The next step, obviously, is to get the study done. That has been budgeted now at this time for this fiscal year. It was not. It came up after this. Well, it had been talked about prior to this event, but with this event, we forwarded it in the CIP to go ahead and get it going this year. So that was actually approved last week as a special ordinance, a change to this year's budget. Yeah. But no, as far as inspecting the system, making sure it's in proper working order, that was all done post 2015, and we have all that information. TVing the entire system is not really routine maintenance. We have a goal to TV our entire system in the entire city. We're at about 15% right now, and we did focus those efforts in the Mater Avenue area first. But unfortunately, it is quite time consuming to slowly run the cameras through and assess all the pipe, the infrastructure, and so forth.
So I think what I'll add to that is that when an event happens and it gets characterized a certain way, and in 2015 when that storm occurred, everybody used the language 100-year storm, 100-year storm, 100-year storm. And I think what people wrongly believed, and I'll perhaps count myself among those as one of the policy or decision makers at the time that had to do that, is think, okay, so this is a somewhat rare event, and we perhaps have time to look at options that we have available, whether it's the storm drain study that we were looking at on the south side or continuing with our process of I&I, sewer lining, and all of those kinds of things. When a second storm of that magnitude, quite honestly of even higher magnitude, occurs in much less than 100 years, and using that nomenclature, honestly, I think that's a little bit of a wake-up call, that whatever we think normal is relative to weather, I think we can all agree it is different now than it was a decade ago or 20 years ago, and we have to respond to that from a community perspective. And I think seeing another storm of this intensity in such a short duration has, I think, given us cause to say, we can't just look at this and say this is a once every however many years kind of an event. The possibility exists that we could have these on a yearly basis, because it's about statistics, not about how often one of these storms happens. But I think there's no question they're happening more often now with more intensity than they did previously, and as a result, we have to take notice of that and respond accordingly, which is what we're trying to do with the reallocation of dollars that we've got to look at the issue.
Yes, my question, I'm also Mater Avenue. What's the 300,000 I saw on the screen that says, what is that? Maybe I will be over my head. What are we going to do with that money to help with some of the problems that we're having? Because I understand we have the money, but what exactly we're going to do with it?
So the
And I have one more question.
Okay.
The backflow preventers. I thought about that also, but in our situation, if we put backflow preventers in those houses, the only thing that's going to do is send that water right back out into the yard, into the alley, which will in turn then go right back down our staircases into our basements, because it's going to find another way in. So it's a good idea, but I don't know if that's the solution.
Let me address the first question you had. The 300,000 is what was budgeted for the storm or the drainage study. It's probably more than we need, but we wanted to make sure that we budgeted enough to get a consultant on board and do an in-depth analysis of that drainage area. Yesterday, actually, we met with FEMA and other partners at the state and discussed opportunities for us to partner with other agencies, including the Army Corps of Engineers, to have them potentially take a look at that study as well. So we may be able to leverage our dollars and get that study done for less, but we've budgeted 300,000 in order to get that study moving as quickly as possible. Yes, it's a pretty in-depth hydraulic study in that area.
That drainage area, and at some point we can probably pull together more maps to try and explain some of it, is 400 acres. So the amount of water that drains into ultimately Monocacy Village Park is the outfall for everything that comes out of that drainage area. That drainage area runs from basically 7th Street north to probably almost Schifferstadt Drive, TJ High School. It is east-west from East Street all the way to the Frederick Shopping Center on the west side of Route 15. All drains into that same drainage area. So when you talk about a study to try and understand the impacts of water moving into a system, the pipes that are there, part of what you may have seen on one of the GIS slides is the other thing is we think what's in the ground is what's in the ground. What happens by doing the TVing that we're doing is we find out where what's in the ground is not what's in the ground. What's on a map may not be what actually got built. There was a mistake that was made at some time in the past when something was done. So all of this study is to help us make sure that we're looking at the right things when we believe we want to try and solve the problem the way we need to. But as Zach has mentioned, we're trying to cobble together as many resources we can, whether it's FEMA, the Army Corps, city dollars, whatever it takes to try and move forward in the areas where we've identified the highest priorities first. Eventually, we're going to have to get to other areas of the city as well, because the Mater Avenue corridor was not the only one that was impacted by this storm event.
Thank you. And just to try to answer your second question, the backflow preventers are a recommendation in the FEMA pamphlets, which are available over there, along with a laundry list of other recommendations. It's something you may want to consider as a homeowner. It really depends on site-specific as to how your home may have been impacted. If you receive some sewage up through your floor drains, for instance, in your basement, a backflow preventer may have prevented that. There are other instances where it may not have helped. So it's really site-specific, and if you decide to investigate that, you'll want to speak with a plumber and have them come out and take a look at it.
So my question is about the system. Is the system open all the time, or is water diverted to certain areas of the city in a systematic way? Because it seemed like what happened in our experience, and I'm on Mater Ave like these guys, is the water would come up out of the drains, and then as quickly as it would come up, it would go down, as if a door was opened to allow that water to drain. So I just wondered if water is diverted throughout that system.
Sure, yeah, I'll be happy to answer that. No, there is no diversion of water. There are no gates, no doors that are opened. What was likely happening is that there was a hydraulic block, basically, where that line was connecting into another larger line, and when that larger line gets full, it basically blocks the other line as if it were a wall until such time as that larger line begins to recede, and the smaller line, the water can run through there. So it's all hydraulics and how the system is tied together, and you'd have to. Correct. Yeah, there's no gates, no valves, nothing that we actuate or change during an event like that. It's all gravity flow, and when the pipes get that full, it's actually pressurized, which sometimes results in damage to our system.
I live on the west side of town, and fortunately we don't have the same kind of problems that they have around Mater Avenue. But ever since the city Parks Department decided to plant trees and let the bushes grow along Rock Creek, there behind the 7-Eleven, where it goes under Old Camp, the water comes on our side of the little levee there. Nothing goes into the drainage pond. And this problem, and it got within about 30 feet of my house during 2 storms. I have the photos. And this problem could be solved with a bush hog and maybe a little bit of chainsaw and prevent this problem. When they covered all that ground with underbrush and trees and whatever going up as Rock Creek comes down Gambrel, they're pushing the water away from the creek instead of letting it flow from Stonegate Farms down, down the natural grass areas and whatever. We have a stormwater drain or a stormwater settling pond right there on Old Camp, and it hardly ever gets any water in it. So that's, I mean, this problem could prevent a future problem just by, like I said, a bush hog and some chainsaw.
Okay, thank you for the information. I'll take a look at it with our Parks Department.
I have info.
Okay, I'll take it after the meeting. Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I also live along Rock Creek. I live on Rock Creek Drive near Bauman Lane. And I've only lived in Frederick 6 years, but in that time there have been 3 floods. One the first year I moved here, one in 2015, and one this year. And it seems that the storms are becoming more intense, and that the water that comes down from upstream, more of vociferous, and I've seen it go from bursting the banks of the creek and coming up to the grass line one year, to covering the parking lot the next year, to rushing inside of our building this year, and 6 inches worth of water with no place to go. So is there any plan in this heightened sense of awareness that you now claim? Is there any plan to look at some kind of remediation of that situation? I'm coming from a cooperative. I represent 12 families, not just myself here tonight, and all of us are trying to age gracefully in place. However, that's becoming increasingly challenging to do. What can we do in the interim as residents, other than directing grass clippings and leaves away from the storm drain? What can we do, and what's the plan? What's the vision? What is the sense of urgency that the city has?
I just wanted to let you know that I'll be at your condo tomorrow afternoon with Rick Albee. I am, yes. I think we spoke on the phone, I'm guessing. So what we're going to talk about tomorrow is some of those mitigation efforts for your particular property. You asked about a plan for the Rock Creek Basin. kind of the mayor pointed out, we have our priority areas right now, and we will, as best we can, look citywide in the future. The Mater Avenue area was very much impacted. South Street area impacted. Folks on Klein Boulevard, because of the large drainage area that drains down by them and behind Frederick High School. Those areas have been some of our most significantly impacted, much more than, I understand you got 6 inches in your building and it affects the residents there.
Yeah, because all of our buildings were built in the 60s, and all of our appliances,
Right.
heat system, cooling system, hot water, laundry, all of those appliances are in the basement.
Right.
We dodged a huge bullet this year,
Right.
but we can't take a hit like that.
Right. So what we're going to talk about tomorrow is some of those things that may not have been, some of those mitigation efforts that weren't implemented in the 60s, but that we encourage folks that are in or near the floodplain to actually do themselves to help prevent, any kind of large loss. So if the brochure that we have over here, we'll talk about it again tomorrow, like I mentioned, and at least locally to your condo or your buildings, we'll look at what we can guide you on assistance for
Thank you.
mitigation.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm curious about the study of why it was just Mater Avenue. Why couldn't Klein be included? I mean, our house was flooded, and I think we're the only person probably here whose living space was flooded. I think that's a priority. And how long is this study going to take? And do we have to wait? And then what happens? I'm a little concerned that we're going to have to do stuff ourselves. I mean, we already had 5 contractors out to close in our garage. And every one of them said, this is a city problem. It's not your problem, it's a city problem. We had a civil engineer come out. He said the same thing. We don't have answers. Nobody's talking to us. So why is the study, why isn't it all city? Why is it just Mater Avenue? Why is that $300,000? That's a lot of money that could be used to remedy some of the problems.
I think to the point that Zach made earlier, we have that amount of money budgeted, but we certainly hope that it won't take that amount of money in order to get it done. And based on our conversations yesterday with MEMA, FEMA, and the Army Corps of Engineers, we think there are opportunities for us to actually move a little more quickly in some other areas because the Army Corps may be able to come in and help us accomplish some of these studies. So with the amount of resources that we have available, we had to pick priorities based on the best information that we had available. And that's not to say that the situation that you're dealing with is less important to you than what might be happening in some other neighborhood, but we're trying to look at the scope of where the number of properties in a given drainage area might have been affected. In the drainage area where you are, there were a couple of homes that had very acute damage, but the broader issues were not nearly as severe.
That's why I'm asking, why is it not a whole study,
Oh,
the whole city study?
I would have to defer to the folks that cost these things out to know, to do an entire city study.
Well, do all the areas that were affected.
I think our intention would be to move as quickly as we can on all of those areas. We had to have a place to start, but if we find that those resources will stretch farther, I suspect that the drainage basin that we're talking about in terms of what impacted Klein Boulevard is probably next on the list. But we haven't talked about that, but that would be my suspicion just based on things that I.
We're talking this study is going to take a year? Because we can't wait a year. We can't leave our house. Every time we go on vacation, we sandbag the front of our house. It's scary.
I can speak to the study at least. Our goal is to have it done in less than a year, and after our conversations with the Army Corps yesterday, I think there are opportunities to do that, but we've just begun those conversations. So I got them a lot of information that they requested yesterday. I got it to them today. One of the areas that I'll also talk to them about is the drainage area that ultimately drains down to Klein, just so that you're aware, and you may be well aware, but that drainage area is equally as large, potentially larger than the Mater Avenue area. It extends all the way to the other side of 15 and all the way over to Linden Hills. It encompasses a very large area, and unfortunately, all of these areas of the city were built prior to any type of stormwater management regulations being in place, which has resulted in the type of runoff that you see during these events. So.
This meeting that we're having right now,
Yes.
is our presence and our questions and our sense of urgency, is that going to have any impact on your thinking, working, planning, doing around these issues? Are we
Yes.
motivating you for something?
Yes, yes. No, I think that part of, and somebody talked about it earlier about a communication issue. I think that's critical. I think it's critical for us to continue to talk to the community about what we're doing, about what we're thinking, about what we're trying to do, to solicit feedback and input. We as the city have to rely on our experts, our engineers, our planners, and those folks to help us to identify when we've got limited resources, how to allocate those in the way that can best fix the issues that we're trying to fix. I think the reason why we had this was we have to continue to make sure that people know that if they've got issues or concerns about an area that they reach out to us. We can't explore what we don't know. It's a big city and we can't study it all the time, every day. And so we really do rely on these kinds of opportunities, I think, to help further inform our understanding of these kinds of events when they occur. I won't get tired of asking the public to give us information because it helps us to do better what we need to do. Does that mean it will result in an outcome for your specific situation that meets your demand? That's based on dollars and time, and we're going to do the best we can to move as systematically and as quickly as we can, but we can't go any faster than we can go, and we can't spend any more money than we have. But we're committed to continuing to move a process forward that invites the public to be a part of that dialogue.
I'm just aware that there is, in addition to the information gathering and all of that, there's an emotional content here. There's a lot of fear, anxiety, pain, depression, all of those feelings, especially for those of us who are seniors who thought we were going to be leaving something to our children and maybe our property had no value at all now. All of those things are weighing on us.
Hi, thank you for having this meeting tonight. I'm a resident at West 14th Street, so I'm up by Thomas Johnson High School. I've lived in the city for almost 30 years, and I lived on North Market by the Y, so I've seen my share in the past several years of flooding, and I know this was unprecedented, I know this is unusual, but I just want to validate that everybody, I think our fears are very real. I am scared to leave my home very frequently now. Even though what I've done what I can do and we've done what we can do, it is a fear that things are not going to drain properly, that gutters are not, our sidewalks, there's almost no gutter from the street to our sidewalks on 14th Street. So when water comes, it's a river. So gutters normally would drain water away. There is not a lot of storm drains on our street and in my neighborhood. Most of my neighbors were impacted by this flood. So I want to know, is there a mechanism to report this? Is there some place where residents are to go? I have fear that my neighbors have not all reported their issues, and they have some worse than mine.
During the flooding, there was a link on the city website right on the main page. We can put that back. You can also always call into our main switchboard at 301-600-1440, or you can just go in and email. There's to report a complaint, basically, a drainage complaint, and you can report it that way. And those will all be funneled to us, those that are taking a look at them, to try to incorporate them and analyze analyze them and study them. So yes, please encourage anybody that did not report damages and flooding to go ahead and do that. And additionally, to go ahead and report it to the other potential resources such as SBA if they sustain damage, so that they can at least be, have an opportunity to access those dollars.
And people were talking about, I can barely get contractors out to my home. And mine's covered by insurance because mine was a sump pump failure. And I can't get, I've had 2 now come out, and most do not even want to touch insurance. They don't have to because they're inundated with uninsured homeowners. So we're living with the reality of, I can't even get a contractor to give me an estimate at this point. Well, I have, but it's proven to be very difficult. So that's kind of where that's where I think a lot of people are coming from, especially where I live. So I just wanted to make sure that that's being reported, and if there's a way to do that, that we could spread the word, whether it's on social media, whatever it is, so people know. Like, that's how I found out about this meeting, was on Facebook. So how are people getting, this information out and everything?
And I think we have to continue to use all of the channels that we have available. I think we probably did take information off of our website because the main issue had passed, but I think Zach is correct. We need to continue to gather data because that's going to help us, and we can put that information back. We want people to reach out to us. There's an app that you can download for your smartphone called iSpires that allows you to take pictures and send complaints and comments and things directly into the appropriate agency within city government and to your elected officials. So we're connected through that. The app is called iSpires. It's a free download from the 2 major providers that provide smartphone apps. The issue with the streets and the amount of the curbing. So I'm learning a whole lot more in this job about infrastructure than I ever thought I was going to need to know, but because I like to learn things, it's actually not too bad. It's fun. We're learning that the way in which we do street overlay projects matters in terms of our long-term ability to manage stormwater in the way that we need to. When that street is originally designed, it's designed with a curb at a certain depth, with a gutter pan to work a certain way, and all of that is volume for water to move in. If you do an overlay project, even at, I don't know what a standard overlay is, an inch or 2, and you don't mill and overlay properly before you put that new surface down, and you go curb to curb, you have now taken up 2 inches worth of volume in the street that water can move through. So across our Department of Public Works, we have to think about the way in which we do business at every step of the way to not create problems while we're trying to solve problems. So we go through the city and we know that people don't like cracks in their streets. They don't like, broken curbs. They don't like potholes. We deal with that in the wintertime. When spring comes around and we try and catch up on some of those kinds of things, we have to make sure that we don't fix one problem and inadvertently create a different one. So we have to be smarter as a city in terms of how we manage our infrastructure as well.
Thank you.
We're actually, because this is being televised, we want the folks who may be watching to hear you.
Okay. Our neighbor was born in the house that he's living in right now. They had no floods, but they also didn't have parking lots everywhere with runoff. On East Street, there's a new apartment building that just went in. It's huge, and it's all done, with graded, paved roads. There's a new Walmart. There's a new this. My question is, are these private companies involved at all in paying for some of the infrastructure that really nails us? Because that runoff just comes flying off and it's got to go somewhere.
Anything built post stormwater management regulations is required to install their own stormwater management on site. So the new apartment buildings you mentioned, new Walmart, they have on-site stormwater management facilities which capture that water and then slowly release it after a storm event. The problem is all of the properties that were built out prior to those regulations being put into effect, which was, I think they started in the mid-'80s and they've been developed and fixed over time to address some of these issues.
So none of their stormwater runs into the public sewage system or the public drainage system?
No, that's not to say none of it eventually reaches that system, but what happens is on-site in their private stormwater facilities, that water is collected, and then it is slowly released back into the system after the events have passed. It's designed using modern stormwater management regulations.
Right. Did you check on them after the storms to make sure that they were releasing properly and that they functioned and they worked? And
Their private facilities?
yeah.
We do a routine inspection of those facilities. It is every 3 years. So no, we did not particularly check on private facilities after the fact. I'm not aware of any issues with those private facilities, but if anybody has witnessed any issues with them, then, please report them in and contact the property owner.
The East Street apartments and all of those parking lots are right next to the Monocacy Village Park, which is where all of our water ends up.
Right.
So it's impossible to believe that all of those parking lots aren't used to be fields where water got processed in a natural way, and
Right.
it's no
Without having the
surprise.
plans in front of me, I can't say for sure, but I would assume that they still drain to that same location. It's that the water is captured and then treated and then slowly drains back into that area, and that's how modern stormwater management is designed.
Right. Would you consider ever having meetings with the private and just making sure, just checking, because it seems that there's an awful lot of water that runs off of a lot of parking lots, and
So, this represents, I think, one of our challenges that we have to work through. The new stormwater management regulations put a burden on us as local government to, one, ensure that these private facilities are being constructed according to the regulations. Number two, to then get out on a regular basis and inspect them with people who know. So that's the once every 3 years inspection. Now, why is it every 3 years? Probably because experts somewhere said, you know what, about every 3 years is how often you really need to inspect these to make sure that they're working properly. If they're working properly, they should work properly for some period of time. So you come back out inspections, make sure that overgrowth and weeds and bushes and other kinds of things, anything that could damage that facility from working the way it's supposed to, haven't taken over. The other issue is we're under a mandate over time as the city that we have to find a way to actually remove some of the impervious surfaces that currently exist in the city of Frederick. So over time, this mandate is going to require us to look at places where we have large paved areas that don't have proper drainage and figure out how we can turn those back into areas where water will drain more appropriately, so that there isn't any question that hard surfaces are vehicles for water to move, that not vehicles for water to drain through. And so I say all of that only to say that it's not an inexpensive proposition. The city of Frederick has had a stormwater fee for more than a decade, where a little piece of your water bill every quarter puts money into a stormwater management fund, and that stormwater management fund is the fund that we use to do the kinds of studies that we're talking about, to do the kinds of inspections that we're talking about. It is an inadequate amount of money to accomplish everything that we need to accomplish. And so we're going to have to look very hard as a city about how we supplement those resources, whether it's working with places like the Army Corps of Engineers or FEMA or whoever it is, or using our own resources to figure out how we can move as quickly as the public will allow us to move to study what we need to study. But in terms of the specific question, there's a plan in place for how those things get inspected, but every new project is a new private facility that has to be maintained and monitored and inspected on a regular basis. And we added staff in the last budget to try and help us do a better job of keeping up with that.
Yeah, I was was a few minutes late getting here. When anybody brought up West Patrick Street, the storm drain over there by China Garden?
So I'll let Zach, but we didn't talk about that specifically. But
Yeah,
it is
that's
but
the
it is an
drain's
area-
way too small. It backs up every time. It's flooding everybody's houses.
It's an area that's been identified as an area of need.
Yeah, actually, thank you. I sent that over to Army Corps of Engineers today. You may have missed it, but we did meet with them yesterday with FEMA. That is also one of the areas that we're going to ask them to take a look at. It's in a mapped floodplain, so we've just begun those conversations with them.
Yep, I'm losing like 20,000 each time.
Okay.
I live on Thomas Avenue.
Okay.
If you have not reported specific locations or that information to us, make sure that you send us that information so that we've got it. Again, we're trying to track addresses and impacts to the
Okay.
greatest extent possible.
How do you do that?
Through
I'm
the
not
ci-
on the internet a lot, so.
Through the city's website, we have we have a sign-up sheet going around. Did you sign in on the sign-up sheet?
No, I was a little bit late getting
Okay,
here.
we'll give you the sign-up sheet, indicate your information, an address, an email, or a best way to contact you so that we can
Okay.
reach out if we need to gather more information.
Good evening, Mayor. Thanks so much for having this. I'm Steve Hine. I'm chair of the YMCA board, and this is the 2.5 years ago. We had a $1.7 million event as a result of the first flood, and that was a uninsured event that we had to basically fix with our own funds. The good news was we were able to get flood insurance because we're not in a flood zone, but we took that. Precautionary measure, and this time we did have flood insurance. But nevertheless, this flood cost us about $1.6 million, and it's going to be a significant amount of money out of pocket, certainly in the six-digit range. What's interesting, and I want kind of some clarification just about the study, because the first flood was ground surface water, stormwater management, and we spend significant dollars to try to mitigate future damage as a result of putting up these flood plank walls and different things around the property, and moved all of our, as much equipment as we could up to a second floor so that if it did flood again, we got it out of the basement and so forth. This flood, again, a different type of flood, because it not only was surface or stormwater, but it was also water that came in through the sewer. I was down in the early childhood development area, and just give a sense of scale, we have about 95,000 square feet in the building. 45,000 square feet was flooded in both cases. What was different about this one is I literally was just watching water come out of the sewer, out of the toilets, and that's where a majority of the water in that part of the building, which was considered a total loss, came from. I could build a moat around the Y. I can't stop that. And I'm wondering about the study. Will it address that? Because again, there's things maybe we can do on site and these stops and so forth. But at the end of the day, I can't mitigate everything with a Y to prevent it. And so I just need to understand where we're going.
So I would say, and Zach or Tracy can step in as well. So we talked at one point about a sewer study that is being done. So one of the things that we know will be addressed within the next. When is the bypass of the counties? What? Within the next. So we're. They'll be able to explain it better than I will. I'll butcher it, so I'm going to let them deal with the details. So we're working on something that will help in terms of the capacity at our wastewater treatment plant to not be impacted while we continue to deal with the inflow and infiltration problem. It's why backflow preventers are the kind of investment that individual property owners may want to make if they believe that the risk of a sewer backup is something that is something significant for them. There is specific insurance you can buy for sewer backups, but there's also infrastructure that can be installed that potentially protect in that regard. That would be the solution for the thing that you can't control, which is the pipes that you don't have any, the moat or your, wall. Your wall isn't gonna keep out. It isn't gonna come out what can come up through the drains. And I'll just say on an unrelated but related area, this again, something that I've learned coming through this, and I live in an older house that almost always gets water in the basement when it rains. And this was one of the first times that I've had water coming into my house as a result of inflow from rainwater faster than the floor drains would take the water out of my house. But what I also learned was that floor drains in homes that are connected to the sewer system is no longer appropriate code. And so it's another thing that homeowners probably want to look at. If you live in a home that was built prior to 1970 something, probably, you have floor drains in your basement that are connected to the sewer system, not to a storm system. And you probably want a plumber to come in and look at that system and figure out what the right way is to close those drains off, so that in the event of a sewer backup, you don't have raw sewage coming into the floor drains. That might not help you have a low-lying toilet in a basement, but certainly you wouldn't have raw sewage coming through floor drains in your basement. And that's an issue. And it's something that in my own home, I've got to look at the cost of what that's going to be as just one little piece of protection. I live in an area where sewer backup seems remote, but I suspect there are an awful lot of people in this room, people who are watching, people who had this experience who never thought it was something they were going to have to deal with. So there are things, and again, there's information that we're trying to put out to the public and the community, things that you need to do as a property owner on your own to take protection, and then things that we can try and do on the public side to mitigate those issues. But I'll let them talk specifically about what's happening with our wastewater treatment plant in terms of how I don't want to say that it would prevent this from ever happening again in a storm of this magnitude, but this is all about lots of little things that hopefully add up to something big.
So as the mayor said, it really would not help in this situation, the hydraulic impacts of the sewer backing up into the homes. But we have been working with the county over the past couple of years. We take flows from the county and pass them through our wastewater treatment plant. The county is in the middle of a project to construct a bypass to take those flows past our wastewater treatment plant. That will result in a benefit to us as the city. During this last major event, we were forced to unfortunately dump sewage into Carroll Creek and the Monocacy River because we were taking close to 40 million gallons a day in a plant that generally gets 7 to 8 million, so we did not have any other option. Having those county flows out will certainly assist us in lowering the amount that we're trying to pass through the plant, but it would not, unfortunately, really provide any benefit to this area in specific when it comes to whether or not sewer would back up into your home.
Okay. I just one thought, I appreciate that. It gives us some guidance. Again, we know we're going to have to spend significant dollars to try to further mitigate, the what-if questions on how a future storm might impact us. And again, this storm was different in that, unlike the first storm where the water came from the outside, this water came from the outside and the inside. After the first storm, and again, I appreciate all of you have met with the Y independently and very productive discussions. And as we conducted a study, we had a site and civil engineering calculation study on the system, and about 300 acres of stormwater management drains into that 78-inch pipe in the alley next to the Y. And I can tell you, I sat out there the second day because there was actually a heavy rain the day after the flood, and we were at the Y, and I stayed out there with Tom Klingman, and we were keeping the drain clear. And at the one end where the smaller lines go into the 78-inch, that's where the water was coming out. But down the line on the 78-inch is where the water was going in, and I was keeping that clear. And so my question is, I know you talked about maybe some smaller projects that we may be able to do along the way. Is maybe part of this study, that so we are not having to wait multi-years before we actually maybe do something that might impact us in a positive fashion?
Yeah, that is actually, that alleyway is a place that we have looked at to improve that 100-year-old drain or whatever, and as we've discussed, there's possibility of another drain or two along that to get water out of there faster so that as it comes from the upstream 300 acres, there's a place for it to go.
Right.
Yeah, that we're getting the water off the surface at the Y so that as it comes down through the pipe, that water's already gone as best we can. So yeah, we are looking at it. We've sized a drain for that area. And with this study, what we'll look at is other places where either we can hold water and retain it so that it can drain slower out, or if there's a possibility of other inlets that we need. I'm not sure, but it is a short-term fix that we're looking at.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I just wanted to tell you my personal experience. That night of May 15th, I heard on the cell phone, flood alert. So I was on Bowman's Lane, your neighborhood, and I thought, there's no way I'm going down over that little bridge because that's going to be flooded. So I went by the fire department, took a right on Rosemont. It was so dark and rainy. It was really hard to see at what I was driving into, and I was in front of the sheets, and there was 2 feet of water I drove into. But luckily, I went more toward the middle of the street and was able to take a left up Wilson, and that was an uphill, and that was enough. I was still in about 6 inches of water going up Wilson, and the water's just rushing down. And I got all the way to 7th, and it was about 6 inches of water, and then going back down Fairview about 6 inches. But all this water is just racing down the hill from all these streets onto Rosemont and Baker Park. And I've never even noticed how many drains there were on these streets until that experience. And now I'm looking, and there are very few drains on these streets. So.
I just wanted to add, I think it's an excellent comment, and I was out there that evening as well. The areas that you described, if you haven't had a chance, if you'd like, take a look at our city website at GIS, Spires GIS. You can go on there and see a map of the city, and I would highly suggest that you click on the floodplain layer and take a look at where the limits of the 100-year floodplain are mapped by FEMA. Those limits are theoretical, but it is where basically you should expect there to be standing water during what's deemed as a 100-year flood event. And at that point, basically, the storm drain infrastructure is useless, and they're looking at where would the limits of that flooding be based on how much flow can be conveyed down through those stream valleys. That area in particular is actually within the 100-year floodplain. That whole area of Rosemont is expected to be underwater during a 100-year flooding event. So it does not surprise me that you saw that out there.
And the only thing that I'll add to that is that the system was designed for storms of a certain magnitude. And when storms exceed that magnitude, the system cannot keep up. And the question that we have to ask as we look at future stormwater retrofit projects is, what's the threshold that we want to design and mitigate to? Is it this storm? Is this the new benchmark that we're going to build to? I have no idea what that would look like from a infrastructure standpoint. But those are the kinds of questions that we're going to have a conversation as a community about, to understand this level of infrastructure will protect us against an event that looks like this. This level of infrastructure will protect us against an event that looks like this. This level costs X, this level costs Y, and it's about our capacity to pay for it with the resources that we have. It's about the community's capacity to pay for it in terms of there's no, and I feel kind of silly even saying this, the government doesn't have money. It's your money. Whatever we want to do to fix this problem is going to come from all of us contributing to make it happen. And we just have to figure as a community what we can withstand in order to do that.
Hello, everyone. I'm a neighbor to the YMCA. I backed right up to it. I received heavy damage 2015 and this year. I lost 2 brand new vehicles. I lost everything in my basement, my garden. I have a sound system. I lost the sound system. I lost my fish. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to point fingers at the YMCA with all that blacktop over there, with that inadequate drainage. I've seen many a storm, and I've watched how the water flows. It all goes to that one drain. It's like a bowl, and it all rushes down. And once again, I even point my finger at the city. I didn't see any workers down there cleaning those drains, but there were some workers at the Y that were doing it. I'm very traumatized by all this because I take pride in my property. I know others are have received just as much loss, but I just feel like the YMCA should do something to get the water to go to the opposite direction, especially that back parking lot. I've enjoyed the Y. They've been very good to me. I can't knock that. But I am very concerned about all this water and the future issues.
Yay. I had another thought. Sorry. As the conversation is going, I'm thinking more and more, and I'm trying to be more proactive and problem solving here. And I remember I lived in Greenbelt for 10 years, and I was a member of something called the Maryland Environmental Trust. They workshopped and trained a group of private citizens like myself to be the boots on the ground, eyes and ears on properties that had received a tax easement, and were encouraged to be planting trees and foliage, etc., as opposed to putting in blacktop. And every 3 years, we went out and we inspected these properties, 2 or 3 or 5 of us at a time, going around, to be the boots on the ground, because you're not going to be able to provide the staff to do all the work that's needed to be done. Is there any, I'm sure part of the frustration that we're feeling and anxiety is because we feel so helpless. Is there anything that we as private citizens can do, banding together, to be more proactively your eyes and ears? Can you plug us in some way? Can you train us? Can we become more environmentally conscious as a city and as citizens?
So definitely yes to the last question. To can we train you? What I really like about that is it's an innovative and creative idea that may be something that we can do something with. There may be a way that we can build a kind of civilian conservation corps, going back to the old New Deal approach. People who come in, I don't know the answer to that question, but it is an idea that we can explore to try and figure out, are there ways in which we could empower residents who wanted to gain the expertise to do it to assist us in some manner. I don't know the answer to the question, but it's certainly something that I think is worth asking some questions to people who would probably know the answer better than me.
I have one more question, and forgive I'm deficient when it comes to engineering and all that stuff, so you'll know better. The first night, was it just the volume of the rain and this, because I know the first night it was like, the second night I feel like most people were additionally impacted. Okay, so, and then was the next day, was that when the sewage was released, the third day? I'm trying to remember that timeline, and you put a thing out where you asked residents to not use excessive showering, dishwashers, and I know many people in here.
That was Wednesday. So the big storm was Tuesday night.
Right.
That was when we got 7 inches in 3 hours. There continued to be rain falling the next day. We put the state of emergency into effect on Wednesday afternoon. Asked people to reduce their water usage to the degree that was going into the wastewater
Right.
system because we didn't want to add more volume. At that point, we were approaching that 40 million gallons of flow into our wastewater treatment plant, which probably says a lot about the amount of water that was probably flowing into people's floor drains across the city, and inflow and infiltration across the city that was getting into our wastewater treatment plant. We did not finally get to a normal, so this tells you about the volume of water we were talking, we did not get back to a normal flow at our wastewater treatment plant until the following Tuesday. We lifted the state of emergency a week later because the state of emergency had passed, but we were not at normal flows at the wastewater treatment plant even a week later.
So, because I know when our sump pump failed the first night, that came out of our sump pump. But the second night, it was coming out of drains in our unfinished basement. So that was like, that was water not being able to go, where it needed to go.
Surcharging of the wastewater system.
So you all had not really, and again, and I'm not, believe me, I know the sewage in the rivers and the creek was not ideal, but it's emergent, and cities have to do that from time to time. If water was released earlier, could that have prevented, if sewage could that have prevented that second night where a lot of people got really hit hard by the backup sewer pipes?
The plant was already overflowing. It was just us choosing which way to direct the flows at that point. I mean, the water was coming. It was going to go wherever it was going to go. We had manhole covers that were blown off down near the plant. It was running out of the manholes down near the
So
plant.
if you would have released water even earlier, that would not have stopped that second night
and
flood.
especially with the elevation and location that this part of town is at, it sits much higher than our plant. It's so far removed from our plant that those flows were not backed up in the sewer system all the way up to there. The other reason for the additional flooding the second night, even though maybe it wasn't quite as heavy of a rainstorm, obviously, is the effects are cumulative. The groundwater level was up at that point. All the stormwater ponds were full, so getting hit again with a double whammy, even if it was only 3 inches, felt like a much larger storm because it really had nowhere to go.
So in the future, if we have, because now again, that's 3 storms that I've seen since I've lived in the city of this kind of magnitude. This was the worst. Can we start mandatory, or not mandatory, can we do that voluntary stuff earlier and not wait? Can you start that stream going?
It's
and I don't stream, that probably wasn't a good word to use.
I understand the question, and it's an interesting question. So normal volume at our wastewater treatment plant on any given day is 8 million gallons. So that's what we normally use on a normal day in the city of Frederick is 8 million. We were at 40 million at the high point. If everybody turned off all of their water for 24 hours, we're still well over the capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. So when we were asking people to reduce some of their water usage, I think it was, in hindsight, it was, I think, an opportunity for us to have solidarity as a community. It was a drop in the bucket when you talk about the amount of rain that had fallen, and to Zach's point, the fact that the ground now was saturated. So there was really nowhere for the water to go when new rain came down. And at that point, as the water table is probably above many of the pipes that are underground at that point, it's finding every crack and crevice that it can get into a system. It wasn't about a problem in a specific area. It was an entire system that was effectively from the ground all the way to the top of the wastewater treatment plant underwater.
And are sinkholes an issue?
Yes.
Because I know that's my
often,
next fear, is that my house is gonna
and often those don't materialize until days later. So you have to have the water is rushing, and then the next storm comes, and that the engineers can explain the science behind sinkholes better than me. But yes, particularly because we're in geology where sinkholes are not uncommon.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and staff, and again, thank you for having this meeting. I'm Ann Rollins. I'm actually here this evening with my good friends from the YMCA, supporting them through yet this second big flood event. But some questions that are prompted hearing the other discussion. The Baker Park area, within recent years, they have planted and enormous number of trees, particularly in the Schieferstadt section of the park. I understood that was all for sediment and erosion control to keep the stream banks from eroding further. And now they're in the midst of the shared youth path realignment, widening. There's been grading. As part of that project, as a neighbor, I was asked for comments, and I did comment to staff concerns about adding more impervious surface there, grading, and whether that would further exacerbate the issue with the holding ponds, which, as you say, Baker Park is designed for the overflow when the flood control project works to be a retention pond and then for the water to flow out. The problem is that the water doesn't flow out. It is in a basin. And is there any plan that once the Carroll Creek recedes to a normal level within its banks, that then that water could be pumped from those retention ponds into the creek to flow through the flood control project as it's intended? Because what happens is the water sits in there, it continues to seep into the groundwater, and it needs to go somewhere, and it ends up in everybody's basement in Baker Park. So to avoid that, or to alleviate it somewhat, or maybe mitigate it somewhat, has there been any thought to, rather than just allowing the water to sit stagnant in those basins until it drains in and of itself into everyone's basements, why couldn't it be pumped into the creek so it would flow down through the flood control project? There's still areas down there from Fairview all the way to Color Lake by the covered bridge, the baseball diamond. They still can't mow in there. The grass is feet tall because it's still that saturated with water 2 months after the event. So if perhaps the city could just, and I realized it might be temporary pumps, and I was told that more drains would be put in at the time they were doing the shared youth path widening. Why isn't there some way, even if it's a temporary fix after a major event, to pump that water into the creek and get it out through the flood control project as that was intended, rather than letting it sit stagnant and just eventually, here we are 2 months later, there's still water in that area? So how can that be alleviated? Because I know there are a lot of neighbors in that area very concerned about that. Thank you.
I would say this is one of the other, beneficial things about a meeting like this. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody suggest that. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that as a
Well,
solution.
I will also say this. It was the first time in my life, and I've lived in the Baker Park neighborhood all those years. Well, I grew up there as a child. I now live back in that neighborhood. I had never before seen the Schifferstadt side of the park completely filled with water up to the edge. And my prayers were first that the flood control project would work, which it did, that my sump pump would work, which thankfully it did with a little bit of help. And my third prayer was for my friends here at the YMCA, because I knew if they flooded in 2015 that this event was going to harm them as well. So thankfully the flood control project worked, but there has to be a way then, after everyone says, oh, thank goodness the flood control project worked, to get that water out of those basins sooner so that it doesn't continue to go into everyone's basements. And once the creek level's down, I mean, you could put it back in the creek and get it out through the flood control project. That's what it's for.
We have not quite finished that shared use path area. There were a few drains put in underneath that area of the shared use path. Specifically, what we're talking about is where the baseball field is, the Fairview back down to Color Lake. There will be some additional drains put in once the path project is complete, and in an attempt to dry out that area to provide some kind of free flow, so that we don't have standing water, that it can discharge after an event is complete and the creek has gone down, so that our Parks Department can mow it and there's not a lot of standing water there.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who has any questions? Well, we're going to bring you the microphone, sir.
Once again, I'm going to bring the YMCA into it. They've been putting a retaining wall or a wall down there to help protect them. And I know they have the right to protect their property, but I have a right to protect mine also. And I believe this water that's going to cause water to back up on me even more. And even though I'm just a little bit higher than the YMCA, I'm just concerned what they're doing there to protect themselves. They're putting me in danger. I had it was 6 feet of water in my basement, over 4 feet of water in my garden. I really thought that was going to come up to the first level of my house. I called 911. They sent the independent hose company. They came twice to pump. They were very prompt, but I was very concerned about really losing my house. And once again, I have been very upset over it. Every time they're calling for rain, I think there's going to be another flood. That entire north side of 9th Street was affected, even the south side. I just think there's a lot of areas in Frederick that just need attention.
And I appreciate that. I don't think it does any good for you to hear me or anyone standing up here say, we're listening to you. We are listening to you. But I think we recognize that the proof is going to be in the actions that we take. And I think we've tried to commit to and have tried to use this as an opportunity to explain what it is that we're trying to do, that we're committed to trying to move forward and figure out what we can do long-term to address these issues. I said at the beginning, it's not going to happen as fast as anyone wants it. I appreciate the concerns of people who are worried about their house, their home, their investments, their way of life, whatever it might be. And we're going to move as judiciously and smartly as we can to try and meet the community's needs in this regard. We can't go any faster than we can go, but we will go as fast as we can to try and resolve it. And I can only say that we want to be as responsive as we can. And so if people don't feel like they're getting good information from us, then either we need to do a better job of providing that information, or you need to ask us, and we'll try and give you the answers that you want. Sometimes that answer may not be the answer that you want to hear, but I can't do any better than trying to respond as best we can. If you have not signed in or left some contact information for us, if there's additional after action information, we will certainly try and push that out, because now we've gathered people's information. Please share the information with your neighbors about our need to know what you experience, because that's going to help us as we continue to do our planning moving forward. So 2 more hands quickly go up. So
I want to respond to our neighbor at the Y and say that clearly what we're doing, and as we talk about it, I can say as the chair of the Y, we talk about it not just in terms of how it benefits the Y, but what we can do for our neighborhood there. The study that we conducted was really, well, obviously it's for us to understand what's happening at the Y. We know what we are doing at the Y also impacts our neighbors, and frankly are advocating on behalf of the neighbors as much as anyone, because we know water that's coming into the Y part, the Y property is also right in the backyards of our neighbors. And so whatever, we're looking for a solution that frankly benefits everyone along that alley, not just the Y. And I can tell you that we're looking at ways of even within the Y of pushing the water, to other parts of our parking lot, so it doesn't go into that low part, which is where we have the issue. So we're very sensitive to our neighbors, and the solutions we're looking for are mutual solutions with our neighbors versus something that's unilateral just for the Y. So I think it's important that our neighbors know that we want to solve this for the neighborhood, not just the Y.
So early in the meeting, just really practical, positive things is you're going to put some information back up on the website that was taken down and instruct the people that are getting calls tomorrow, because I'm sure everybody's going to call in tomorrow to that number that you gave, what's supposed to happen to that information when they get deluged with these phone calls tomorrow. That's not supposed to be an answer to me. That's supposed to be something that you're going to have to do, because it's a difference between tonight when we're all sitting here and tomorrow at 8 a.m. when people walk in the door and the phone just doesn't stop.
Sure. So I would say, personally, my preference would be that the information be emailed in. That's the easiest way to get the information to us, but if you want to call that number, please do. That number is our emergency switchboard, so because you're not experiencing a flooding emergency at this moment, they're not going to send anybody out there, but what they'll do is they'll gather that information and they'll type it up and they'll convey it to the appropriate department so that we have that
my neighbors
data.
are all seniors, and I don't think very many of them are on the internet.
Yeah, well then they're certainly welcome to contact that number, and that information will be given to the appropriate staff.
And I think that's why we want to make the phone number available. We want to make the email available. It's why we encourage people to use the app. We have to use as many different methods as we possibly can. The one benefit of the app for those who download that is that automatically places that information into our tracking system. So it immediately gets entered without there having to be a lot of extra data entry the way it may come through if it comes through a phone call or just a random email that comes through. So it's another area where we're constantly working to try and improve the way in which we collect and gather and use information in order to solve problems. But we're not afraid of people reaching out to us. We want them to reach out to us. If we're asking people to send us that information, it's because we need it so that we can do a better job of what we're trying to do. If it's a question or a concern that requires a response, then we will do our best to try and get information out to folks as quickly as we can. And as you heard through the interchange today, I mean, Tracy will be out with this lady tomorrow. So we're out as we talk to people. We're looking at the concerns. When they bring things to our attention, we go out, we look at it, we want to understand the magnitude and the scope of what it is that we're dealing with. So I appreciate that. We'll be ready, and if we're not ready, then we'll have to get ready. I didn't do anything with it in time.
The storm page is up and the information is still there, and it's been updated today. So it's City of Frederick /storm. So all the information in the online form is there.
So any information that we put up relative to the storm, you'll be able to find there, City of Frederick /storm. And we'll try, and if you have suggestions about additional information that you'd like to see us included there that would be helpful for you, links to other things. We've talked about our GIS, and maybe it might be hard to find that. If we can provide other links on that page that can take you to the resources that we think would be useful to you, we're open to those suggestions as well. So we want it to be a tool that works for our residents and as intuitively as it possibly can. We'll wrap it up here. I guess I'm going to turn it over. I'll let Jack Markey has indicated he wants to say something. So again, Jack Markey is with Emergency Management in Frederick County.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to say a few words to folks in the room and those at home, but particularly those folks in the room. I'm here on behalf of the strong relationship we have with the city, on behalf of County Executive Gardner and his staff, to say that this isn't just an issue that the city is working on. I'm joined in the back of the room this evening by representatives from state of Maryland agencies. Governor Hogan has been engaged, Lieutenant Governor also came out the day after the flood to help identify state resources that may be made available to residents. So if there are any residents that still have unmet needs that are here in the room, please make contact with Dennis Dudley, Joy Hatchett, or other staff in the back of the room, and we'll make sure we can get you in touch with additional assistance. And we remain committed to helping the city sort this out along with our state and federal partners. So thank you, and thank you for the partnership.
Jack, thank you. Again, I appreciate you coming out here this evening. If you think about something later and you want to send an email, you know where to find us. But I certainly appreciate it, and we look forward to continuing to work with our residents to try and do the best job that we can on behalf of this community. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.